And when we're talking finances, a couple things that I just want to remind you guys about, and anyone watching this or anybody that shows up late, that when we're talking finances, we're going to be talking pretty generally tonight. So we're going to talk about some general ideas of financial aid, how financial aid works, how to review award letters, which is kind of the packet that I gave you in front of you, so that we'll look at some of those. There's more in there than we'll take time tonight to look at, but everyone's going to have a little bit different situation because it is dependent on your family's finances, on the schools that you end up looking at or going to. So that's the reason why we don't go super in depth with some of the things. And many times why like really detailed questions about your own situations are usually best suited for like a one-on-one meeting. And sometimes actually, if it gets too in depth, again, I'm not a financial aid expert. I'm an expert in helping you guys apply, helping you guys find the resources, understanding some of the process. But in terms of like, will this or putting my money here or doing this with my money, will that help in terms of my financial aid responsibilities? That's really a question best suited for like a CPA or a financial advisor of some sort. We do have a few in the area that I can recommend. If you would like, I'd have to look them up and stuff like that. But there are a few that I've had people go and use in the past that have been happy. So right now, to be perfectly honest, in senior year, it's probably somewhat on the late end of that spectrum. But that's kind of what, it's still there. So just remember, this is also a yearly process when we're looking at financial aid. So it won't be, I promise you, it won't be quite as difficult as it will seem to be this year in subsequent years after this. But it will be still complex regarding, having to remember you have to do the FAFSA every year. You have to do the CSS profile if that applies to you every year. And that the financial aid, when we're looking at money, typically it's given to us in a yearly fashion. It's not given it to us in a 4-year or 5-year bulk item. We have to kind of assume, because a lot of people look at it and say, oh, $40,000, that's not too bad. I can make that work. And then you multiply it by 4 or 5, and then everyone's eyes fall out of their heads. So that's just another reminder when we're looking at that piece. And it's also a good reminder for your students, because your students do have skin in the game, and actually most of the skin in the game, unless that you're offered like parent loans and stuff like that. So most of the loans actually fall on their shoulders. Naturally, you'll probably be a guarantor or a co-signer for, but it is something that, you also want to caution them about, and we'll talk about loans and that kind of stuff in a few minutes. But using your adult brain, if you go out, you send them out car shopping, what are they going to go shop for? The most expensive car, the most flashy car. Like, they're not thinking about 10 years down the road, I'm still going to be paying this off, and it's going to take half of my paycheck. Okay, so just having that kind of financial maturity that they don't have, that is a really big component of that financial aid process that I really, really encourage you guys to be involved in. I say, be hands-off for this process. The financial process is your big hands-on process. Okay, and that's kind of where you guys have a lot of the fingers on the buttons and stuff like that, and have the ins and outs. The students have probably almost no idea about the financial aid, about how finances work, how loans and debt and that kind of stuff all kind of comes in down the road. So do play in there. Tonight, we're going to work through this agenda a little bit. There will be a few pieces that I'm going to skip someone over based on, we'll cover it a little bit more in depth a little bit later. There's a lot of slides in this slideshow as well, so just know if I'm skipping over it, most likely we're going to get to it again later. I kind of piecemealed some different slideshows that I've liked in the past together, rather than try to recreate the wheel myself. And I found that it's been working pretty good, kind of combining the different resources together. And at the very end, we'll actually go away from the slideshow and we'll kind of work through, tonight we'll kind of work through essentially the life cycle of financial aid. But at the end, we'll actually look at what happens at the end of the spectrum and pull up some examples and actually do a little math and that kind of stuff. So a few basic pieces of information, and of course, yeah, oh, there it is. This screen, just so you guys know, this screen has been giving me some issues recently and kind of being laggy or dropping me off, so it might have to fix that throughout the presentation. I also apologize and need some grace. My voice is not great. I was out sick on Tuesday, down with a very short cold, but I feel like I'm much better now. Just the voice is not quite caught up to me yet. So financial aid is the general term that's used to talk about how students pay for school. Okay, and financial aid applies to many, many different types of schools. Okay, so from trade schools, junior college, four-year college, from kind of what people would consider the most tip-top echelon of schools to students attending, say, culinary school or something like that, which costs money, sometimes more money than other schools out there. But there is money and funding available from many different sources available to pay for this. And we'll kind of work through the different types of financial aid that you'll see. So we'll kind of skip through some of that. A quick look at a few of these. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. We got the loans. We have work study, which is basically a college-provided job. If your student gets offered work study, that sometimes will appear in their financial aid offer. It's a pretty cush thing. They usually get pretty much a guaranteed job on campus that's relatively easy. For example, my wife worked in the study abroad office. But the nice thing is they limit their hours so they don't like overwork them. Number two is they work around their school schedule. So they don't have to work for like 6 or 8 hour stints. They'll work for 2 hours, go to class, come back and work for 2 hours more. So it's a pretty cool thing. And some of the money that is used for helping to pay for that tuition or like room and board and all that cost of attendance that we'll talk about. Most students that I know here probably won't qualify for military aids and grants. You might want to, if you have a family member, usually kind of like a parent that has served in the military, you might want to look into options there. We don't have tons of parents that have experienced that coming through here, so I don't have a lot of experience looking into specific programs, but just know if you do have if the child has a parent that has served, there might be options to help support that child through college, not necessarily that they had to serve in the military. We'll talk about merit-based. So merit is based on what you can bring to the table, basically. That is not necessarily sports. It could be athletics. It could be some sort of talent that you're doing, but also things like strong grades, strong test scores, that you participated in yearbook. There's a lot of different merit-based opportunities out there. And then some of the need and non-based grants and scholarships that they'll have. So there are some differences, and it looks like most people in the room will fall under the FAFSA category, but I want to spend just a second and mention that there are two main categories of financial aid. Okay, so the federal government, which is the FAFSA, which we'll take some time looking at tonight together, that is solely for U.S. citizens and eligible non-residents. Okay, so it is not for students that are undocumented. The federal government does not recognize the financial status of undocumented students, so they are not eligible to apply for the FAFSA. However, California, every state also typically has a financial aid process within the state itself. So California says we do recognize the status of undocumented students, so they can still apply for what's called the California Dream Act. And what that does is it basically does a couple things. Number one is it makes them eligible for in-state tuition versus international tuition, which is a huge amount of money in difference. It also opens up things like Cal Grants and Board of Governors fee waivers at junior colleges and things like that, which would normally, if they didn't recognize their status, would also not be available to them, making the cost of college pretty much unreachable for most people. They do typically have to have a high school diploma or a GED equivalent, be pursuing an eligible degree. So there are some degrees, they're very rare and not usually what students here will pursue, that financial aid does not go towards. Occasionally some like for-profit colleges and things like that, they will not provide. They've kind of withdrawn their financial aid status from. Again, the valid social security number, the males. So if you have a son, they have to be registered for the selective service. Okay, so that is a requirement to receive federal financial aid. And I forget what that last bullet was. Oh, satisfactory academic standing, I think is what the last one was. And that's less of now and more of as they continue through college. So they have to maintain good academic progress. So let's look a little bit at how financial aid is actually calculated, okay? And so what you'll find, and I apologize in advance, and if I don't define an acronym, please ask me, and I hopefully remember them all. So just like with college apps, there's a lot of acronyms that you'll see, but basically the big one's gonna be COA, or cost of attendance, okay? And EFC, or expected family contribution, okay? And basically what this equation does is it takes the cost of attendance, which we'll look at again when we do some math a little bit later, is the university or the college or school that your student will be attending puts together an average cost of attendance for the average student at that institution. Okay, both from an in-state and out-of-state perspective. Okay, and so they'll have basically one number that this is how much it should cost your student with like room and board, average kind of spending expenses, a measly transportation allowance and things like that. This is how much it should cost your student per year. Okay, that is kind of the sticker price that most people see when they look up a college tuition. If you went on there and looked it up on Berkeley or on Harvard, whatever it is, they'll have typically a cost of attendance published somewhere on their website. Sometimes you have to dig for it, but that's that sticker price. EFC is the expected family contribution, and that is the number all the way at the end of the FAFSA process that actually spits out. Okay, the FAFSA, basically what it is it takes some data from your tax information, plugs it in through a federal formula, and it spits out this EFC. So the FAFSA doesn't determine your financial aid, doesn't do anything really, other than calculate that EFC number. That EFC number then goes on to the colleges, and the colleges are the ones that actually take it, plug it in, and figure out, okay, how are we going to package this student based on their need? And that need is from that EFC. We'll talk a little bit more. The EFC, there's not a lot to tell you about how it's actually calculated. It's a giant math formula that I don't even know. It's pretty much, it's what it is. If you wanted to check it out, the FAFSA is already open, so it might as well just plug it in and see what happens. There's not a whole lot that you can change or do anything about it. It's using 2016 tax information. However, the difference is going to be kind of like the cost of attendance. The difference is also going to be kind of those merit-based scholarships, the scholarships your student can apply for. And then the differences in the types of schools and how they apply different awards. So we'll talk briefly through that as well. At the end of that equation is the financial need. Okay, so basically this EFC, that EFC number that you'll get at the end of the FAFSA, that is loosely what you can pretty much expect to pay out of pocket. Okay, that you as a family, the federal government, the schools expect you to have a responsibility in supporting your students' post-secondary education at some level, and that level is dependent on that calculation. So when you get that EFC number back, that's a pretty good indicator of we should probably have a plan for about this much. It might be zero, it might be $5,000, it might be $99,000. Again, it's all dependent on your finances. That financial need is the number that college tries to work with. Their goal from the financial aid department is to try to meet as best as possible that remaining number with grants, scholarships, and loans and work study. Okay, so those are the types of aid that you'll get in that area. And if they were able to meet that entire financial need, they're going to give themselves a big thumbs up and say, hey, we did it. If they surpass that need, that's great. That reduces the EFC. You typically don't see that outside of some of the private schools might go above and beyond the financial need. Most state schools are going to stop right at that line. Say we don't have any extra money for anybody. So if they can't meet that financial need, that's what's called financial aid gapping or gap. Okay, and so what that means is we're going to give you this much money on top of what you're already owing. If we're $5,000 short, that's a $5,000 gap. And basically they're saying, if your child wants to come to our school, you're going to have to find somewhere else to fund that $5,000 potentially per year in addition to your EFC. Okay, and that's that gap, and we'll talk about how to do that when we look at the financial aid award letters and kind of what that actually means. So there's a lot of things that actually influence the EFC. Okay, so if this is your first child in college, that EFC will probably be higher, and if you have a couple more students coming through, and I was just talking to someone the other day when they had 2 children in college, like they said, oh my gosh, it really changed how much my financial aid responsibilities were. Obviously I have 2 kids in school, so it doesn't necessarily always even out, but it definitely, their one student who was going really expensive school, that financial aid expectation really dropped dramatically once that second child became a college student. Income, obviously, any savings or assets, the number in college and family size all go into different areas of that formula. All right, the actual FAFSA itself, we're not going to pull it up. I don't really have a great way to demo it. You have to kind of create an account and tie your social security number to it. So I don't really want to have a social security number in the system every single year to demo it. But to be perfectly honest, it's pretty simple. There's only about 2 or 3 spots where you might get hung up. And realistically, your student is the one that should be doing most of that application. Okay, so when you're looking at if you can, like, I know you probably can't visualize it, I can visualize it. When you're looking at the screen, there's once you create your account and also create a FSA ID. Okay, so on a side note, when you're doing that, the FSA ID is basically your digital signature. All right, it would be my suggestion that you plan on signing up for that FSA ID, which is on the same website as the FAFSA, several days before you plan on sitting down to do it. Okay, sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes 3 days, 5 days, a week or more to get that returned. Depends on how accurate your information is and how well it checks up against any social security databases. So they do verify that your name matches the social security number and all that stuff. So that's just something that I want to give you a heads up on. So you might want to hop on there sometime this week to log on if you haven't yet. There are assets that are excluded from that federal family contribution. For example, your family home, your family farm, if it so applies, and the value of any of your potential retirement accounts pending that they're in a specific retirement account type. So if all of your retirement, for example, is in, say, for example, a savings account that's not sheltered from, say, taxes, like, say, an IRA or a 401k is, that's probably going to impact your financial aid because they are seeing that as essentially kind of liquid assets that you can access to support your family. Once we get into more sticky stuff like that, I do encourage people to speak kind of with a tax advisor, a CPA, someone like that, because that kind of gets into areas that are beyond my area of expertise. But there are things that are not excluded. So, like, for example, your family home up here, many times people are worried about that asset because it's it goes, we bought it at 200,000, now it's worth 800,000. Like, that does fluctuate. Rental homes, rental property income, that kind of stuff is a little different, but your family home that you actually reside in will not be included. The other piece that we'll talk about, again, briefly, is another application called the CSS profile, which has very, very different expectations of what is included or not included. We're not going to go too deep into that application because it's usually for a very, very small subset of schools for a very, very small subset of students. So it's not usually an overall thing. It'd be a great time to look at individually. But they do typically include, like, housing costs, maybe a non-custodial spouse's income, things like that. So it goes much, much more in depth. But again, it's only for probably about 150 schools, usually very expensive schools, usually very selective schools, and also usually schools that give out a lot of money if you need it. So they want to make sure that you actually need it. So there's a few federal programs, okay, and this is going to be, again, only qualifying if you are applying for the FAFSA. This is not going to qualify for if you are undocumented. So the first one is the Pell Grant, and this is one that's always a little bit like up in the air, it seems like, every year. It's based on congressional approval and things like that. So every year you kind of have to wait and see how much they're going to fund it, if they're going to fund it, all this other stuff. As long as I've seen it, it's always been funded, but I guess it's not always a guaranteed thing. And the amount is not always guaranteed. Historically, it's always been about $5,800. This is a need-based award. So if your need falls in certain categories, and you can also receive amounts less than $5,800 depending on that need. So you might see differing amounts depending on how much financially your need reports. You cannot be dual enrolled to access this. So this is most common at, like, a junior college level. I know of students, not necessarily at our school, but other colleagues I work with that maybe live in the LA or San Diego area, and they're in junior college now. And they'll take, 2 classes at Miramar College, 2 classes at San Diego Junior College, or whatever it is, because, maybe they don't offer at the right times, maybe they couldn't get in. But in order to keep their progress going in school, they might be enrolled in more than one institution at a time. You can only use these grants, for example, at one, in case that was the case. Some of the other grants are a little less common. The work study, like I mentioned, the Pell Grants, if you qualify, is typically the most common one that you'll see. Work study, like I said, is a great opportunity if students are looking for a job to support themselves on campus. It also is great, just on a side note, apart from the money that comes with it, it's a great way to really embed in a school. So if your students offer work study, I highly encourage it, because not only do they kind of be productive with their time apart from studying, believe it or not, they need to do something other than study and sleep. and party and do all the other stuff that comes with college. But it also helps them get really connected typically with the people that work at that college. So I found that students that have done work study, if anything ever happens, if there's something wrong with their financial aid or their classes or things like that, they are typically much more confident and much more supported in terms of like going and asking for help. They can ask whoever their boss is or whoever they're working with in that department, I need some help with this. And they can really kind of help open doors if that was the case. So I do encourage students to consider work study if they are packaged that in their financial aid. All right, so loans. This is the scary word. So the direct subsidized and direct unsubsidized loans, okay, those are going to be two loans for students. Okay, and they're provided from either the school themselves or the federal government, depending on who's servicing them. Typically, I mean, it's not going to be like the United States of America writes you a check. They contract with different, basically almost banks, Sallie Mae, things like that, that basically fund this, that also manage the repayment over time and things like that. So that's what the kind of direct means. It also means that your like on the word interest rate is also typically locked at the level that you get the loan at. It's also much cheaper than walking into say Wells Fargo and saying I need a personal loan to go to school. That's going to be 15, 18% interest rate potentially. These are typically kind of in the 5 to 7% range. And again, those fluctuate again based on kind of Congress and time of school that your student are in school. The two differences there on the second word, so subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized means that as long as your student is typically enrolled at least half-time, based on what that school considers half-time, it'll be different depending on it. Say, for example, if you're on a semester system or a quarter system, that'll be a different number of units that you'll need to take to be full-time. And really, we kind of run into that issue typically at junior colleges again, when students are not always fully enrolled. They might be enrolled half-time, three-quarters, and working and stuff like that. Typically, students that are going to four-year schools are usually enrolled full-time. That's mostly what you see. But that subsidized means that the federal government basically pays for your interest as long as you're enrolled in school half-time. Okay? So that $5,000 loan they might take out as a freshman in their first semester, as long as they stay enrolled, will still be a $5,000 loan through typically about 6 to 9 months after they've graduated college or potentially their master's program. Okay, so as long as you're enrolled full-time, it'll still be the same amount. Doesn't go away. Okay, that's the loan piece. That's the last word. They do have to repay that money, but it at least doesn't start growing as they go through school and become a $7,000 loan by the time they've graduated. So those, if we have to take out loans, it'd be great if you didn't. Most people don't. I would say 95% of people need to take out loans to go to school. It's just typically a fact of life, and it's really about responsible borrowing rather than, borrowing kind of on money that doesn't exist. Okay, we're taking out $200,000 in loans to go get your undergraduate degree. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense usually. Unsubsidized is basically the opposite. That loan starts accruing from day one and will continue to accrue until you pay it all off. The Federal Plus loan, that's one that you probably will see potentially on your package as well. I try to steer people away from this as much as possible. If you have other loans that are available, try to take those, just because this sometimes has a little bit higher interest rate. It also is basically a loan in your name as a parent. It is also based on your credit. Some people may not qualify based on your credit. If you have any credit issues in the past, they might deny you a Parent Plus loan, which then kind of allows a few other things to happen on the student loan side. We typically don't go into that because that's something that the financial aid office will deal with if that's the case. But it's there if you need it, basically. Okay, so I do encourage, try to avoid it if possible and try to minimize loans altogether, but they're there because most people need to do them. The last one, Federal Perkins loan, is a little less frequent nowadays. I feel like I had some when I went through school, but you see it a little bit less. It's usually kind of going more and more towards the government is the loan provider. You might see it a little bit more, particularly at private schools or something like that, which is a Perkins loan where the school actually provides the money. You'd be paying the school back directly. When we get loans, grants, and things like that, okay, I think students have the idea, and maybe parents too, that when you see this financial aid award letter, you're going to get a big check for $36,000 every year that you get to then go cash, and then you need to go pay the school back. But then I can use any extra money to go buy a new laptop or go to Cabo, something like that. Most of that stuff goes directly to the school itself. So your student will almost very rarely see any of that money dispersed to them. Sometimes for housing costs and some of that transportation fees and stuff like that, they'll see a small disbursement, typically to like a bank account. So if your student doesn't have a bank account yet, I would encourage you guys to help them set that up. You know, I don't know of any great banks. I use Chase, but you know, online banks are really handy sometimes when you don't know necessarily where your child will be, because many times they can access things like free ATMs throughout the country. You can easily transfer money and that kind of stuff, but they will likely need a bank account and debit card potentially. And I would encourage you get your student used to, even if you have to transfer money into their account or if they have their own money set aside somewhere, getting them used to using that debit card responsibly, getting them used to paying for their own application costs with their card and things like that is always a good step to make if you haven't done that yet. So this is kind of small, I'm sorry. Just a rough idea. This is kind of what, and we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at this. This is kind of, there's nothing we can do about it. It's really just information that you need to see. It kind of just breaks down based on the year. So each year that your student is in college, they do up basically the loan amounts that they can have, all right, for a couple different reasons. Number one, their colleges, they realize that college freshmen, just like high school freshmen, are not always the most responsible, studious, you know, mature students in the world. And so they don't just offer them like, here's $10,000, do what you wish. They're going to limit that a little bit. Okay, and as they get through, they also know that they've proven themselves that they're not going to, you know, take out $100,000 for 1 year and then bomb out of school and have to pay that back. Because that is the case. If you take out 3 years of school tuition and you never matriculate, you never graduate, you are still responsible for paying that back. Okay, it's not a well, you didn't give me what you said you'd give me. It's you didn't do your side of the bargain. Now you still owe us, but you don't have anything to show for it. So that's another important factor of having that conversation with your student of this is work time. This is not play time. This is, you know, if you decide to do this, and especially if you're taking out loans, I would encourage it though, you know, mom and dad are paying in for this, grandma's paying in for this, whatever it is. This is not play money, this is work money. And if you don't use this wisely, that money will not be there the next time you want it to be. Okay, so encouraging that conversation. So basically just kind of like giving you a rough breakdown. This is what I was talking about down here. You get about $4,000 more if you're, for example, denied a Parent Plus loan based on like credit and stuff like that. So the student can actually take out more in their name. This is the student's amount with that Plus loan added on. So let's flip the page a little bit, take it back from that federal government standpoint, which is the big picture. Let's focus a little bit more on California. Okay. If your student is looking outside of California, much of this will not apply. I mean, you cannot take the Cal Grants with you, for example. It will not apply if you're going to school in New York. And typically you will not qualify for New York state aid either, because you're not, it's designed for the tax base. If you're paying California taxes, you should be qualified for some potential tax breaks. So the biggest one that students will see at the actually it's at all three levels, the CSU, the UC, and the junior college level, is our Cal Grant system. Okay, the Cal Grants are set up in a way that they help students out. It is much of it's based on need again. So most of what the federal government's going to give you is based on your financial need that you're going to be reporting via that FAFSA. The nice thing is most of this process is all automated. Okay, by completing the FAFSA, much of this is already taken care of. Earlier this year, you probably got a letter home that says, would you like to opt out of something for the Cal Grant, like a Social Security GPA confirmation? I forget what the exact language was. I don't think we got anything back on that, and that's good. We don't want anything back, but we have to legally send it to you because we transmit your data to California, which hypothetically they already have it. But that basically is the second part of that process of seeing about receiving that Cal Grant till we get later on in the year. We talked about the Pell Grant from the FAFSA already, But there's 3 different types of Cal grants, and I feel like I have another slide on that. There we go. So I'm gonna skip ahead to that. So the top one is about $12,000 per year that can be basically tuition reduced by that. And so that is typically where you'll see it comes at varying levels. So you'll see a different cap of that Cal grant, usually up at that UC level. So that $12,000 is not typically seen at the CSU level. You probably will see kind of maybe that $5,000-ish range. But it's applicable to many of these different colleges down here, okay? You can apply it to some independent colleges as long as it's typically in the state of California. And they have to meet a few more requirements, but it's usually, you see it most often used at the 3 state systems. This is grant money, so that means it's free. That is the big magic word that you're looking for in the financial aid report is grants. So that means like it's yours. We don't want to see it again. Please use it, and good luck to you. Okay, that's what they're talking about. They do have to meet a certain GPA requirement to qualify for different Cal Grant levels. We're not going to go through the specifics there. Again, there's not a lot your student can do about that anymore. This is not their senior GPA. This is typically 10th and 11th grade GPA, very similar to the A through G requirements with that. There's not anything they can really change about it, but there's differing levels like 2.5 for this award, 3.0 for this award, and so on. The big thing is making sure that you do complete that FAFSA by March 2nd. So that's the California deadline for any of these priority level awards. If for some reason you didn't get it completed by March 2nd, you will still be able to qualify for certain financial aid, things like some of those Pell Grants and stuff like that. But these are those kind of finite pools of money that then go away. So you won't have that available to you to help pay for school. I would write down this website. They don't necessarily need to go on there right now, but I would say after you guys have filed your FAFSA and gotten your report back, go ahead and typically sign up. It may not, I don't remember if it'll let you do that before they actually have you in the system or not, but they can try, okay? And what that does, it just helps track that, all right? And many times I'll get concerned emails or students setting up appointments and coming in and seeing me about, I got denied for my Cal Grant. I got denied for my Cal Grant. And they're like, why did I get denied? And typically they don't send this lengthy email about all the explanations. And I ask, well, did you check your web grants? And they'll say no. And then we'll log in and it'll give a pretty, usually, sometimes more cryptic, usually a pretty detailed explanation. Well, your income level was too high. Your GPA was too low. Your school didn't qualify, whatever it might be. It'll typically tell you potentially why you didn't qualify if that was the case, or potentially why you didn't qualify for certain awards you thought you might have. All right. So it just helps kind of you guys track that. So I would get them signed up, and then once their award comes back, they can log in and see what happened with that Cal Grant and see kind of where all the money went. There are a few other California aid programs. So the UC Student Aid, and that is going to be what I believe they call the Blue and Gold Scholarship now. This might need to be updated, that particular portion. The statewide, which is typically at the UCs and CSUs, is students can qualify for up to the system-wide fees, which is going to be tuition and like a few other pieces that are less monetary. But the statewide tuition fees, and again, this is all going to be typically need-based. So it depends on your finances. And again, most of this, there's nothing that you have to do. You're already considered based on applying and submitting your FAFSA. You don't have to do anything else other than that. It's kind of decided for you. If your student happens to be a foster child, they can apply for the Chaffee grant, I guess that's how you say that. And then a few other pieces, like for example, if your family is in law enforcement or anything like that, there are potentially other things that you might be able to qualify for that were not always available to you. Let me try to pull this back up real quick. We'll see if it'll let me. I'm gonna go ahead and go forward with this though, and hopefully get this back on the screen for you guys. Might have to mute this real quick. It's a great TV, but doesn't always work. So typically, once you've applied either to the FAFSA, okay, or the CSS profile, you will get confirmation emails, and sometimes even a letter in the mail with your SAR, your student aid report, and then like the Cal Grant and the California applications will potentially give you a CAR or a California aid report. That gives you, excuse me, tentative amounts that you might be offered for your financial aid. Okay, it'll say this based on kind of like what we've seen historically. Here's kind of maybe what you can expect in terms of like all of our federal Pell Grants or our Cal Grant information and how much your award might be. Okay, again, once it pretty much almost always goes to the school. So the individual schools are going to be awarding those things to you. One second. Let's see if I can make this happen or not. Did it work for me? No. All right. See if this matters or not. It's not very smart for a smart TV. Let's stop and ask who has some questions right now. We have more to cover, but anybody have any specific questions right now about anything that we've covered so far? Oh, yes.
Yes, I just want to find out, I just want to be clear on the Cal Grant that comes from after you do the FAFSA. It's not a different application.
Right. So it's not a different application at all. So once you submit the FAFSA, you shouldn't have to do anything else other than I would have them plan on logging into that website. All right, we'll see if that works. If not, then I might have to try something different. So we covered most of what I got up here real quick. Let me try to actually cast it, and we'll just do that way. 1 second. See if this works. Okay. So we covered most of what this is. So there's a couple other things on the screen though that are important as well that I often get asked about. And number one is going to be scholarships. All right. So with the scholarships, those are going to be some of those outside merit-based, typically scholarships that you can apply for. There are tons out there. Okay, but I'll be honest that most of those scholarships your student will not get, even if they spent hours and hours and hours applying. The ones that, so about 80% of most students' financial aid comes from, I'm making up numbers here, but just for the analogy, it makes sense, comes from the school itself and the federal government. Okay, so they're going to give you vast majority of the money that's going to help pay for school. The other amount typically comes from that EFC. Okay, so the family contribution makes up a portion of that. And then the final portion, probably like no more than 5% or so, 10% maybe, typically comes from like outside scholarships. And most of where that happens is going to be in our local and regional areas. Okay, so regional in terms of like Reno, Sacramento, maybe even greater Northern California area. That's kind of where I direct students to really focus their time and energy regarding scholarships. Students can apply to the McDonald's scholarship and Dr. Pepper and kick the winning field goal and win $1 million or whatever it is. But they're sweepstakes. The odds are totally against them. They're probably not going to get those. And so spending hours and hours filling out applications is basically like me or other old people that sit on their computers and fill in all those sweepstakes to win the next cool thing. And then you get a bunch of junk mail and your privacy taken away and all this other stuff for the odd chance of winning something. So typically I encourage my students to get more involved in other areas and spend more time focusing on some of the applications that they're more likely to receive. And that would be, there's 3 or 4 main ones in our area. So if you guys have ever been to one of the awards nights in the past that we hold, usually the night before graduation, most of the scholarships that are awarded that night, until they get to me at the very end, and sometimes I get the fun part of reading, like, this kid got $100,000 or something like that from the school. Those are merit-based scholarships from the school. But most of the other stuff that they get awards and stuff like that handed out, those are from less than 10 applications that come through our school. Okay. And so the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation is a big one. The Tahoe Truckee Community Scholarship Committee is a big one. The Tahoe Mountain Resort Scholarship. Those are the 3 big ones. Those are scholarships typically that have multiple applications that have multiple scholarships underneath them. And those are all those main local ones. Those are ones that we literally hand to students or say, get on the computer right now, log in and do this. Because usually they're actually begging us for more applicants. You would probably, well, maybe you wouldn't be, I'm not sure, depending on your kid. You'd be surprised how many students don't actually fill out scholarship applications, even when they're easy and we beg them to. It's like, you're gonna get money, and they still don't do it, okay? I will tell you the #1 reason why students don't fill out scholarship applications. They say, my parents can afford it. So parents who are listening, just know if you don't want to afford it, even if you can afford it, free money is free money. You can use that money somewhere else. And so encourage them to apply. It also helps, I mean, it just helps them think like they're going to be writing some essays. Yeah, it's going to be a little work, but you know, it's usually kind of like Christmas time. They don't have a ton of stuff going on in Christmas time. They're kind of winded down. They've already got senioritis. Like, have them sit down and fill out a few applications, and especially those main local ones. They're not super complex. They're not super difficult to do. And pretty much if you do those, you're going to be probably getting at that work site. You're going to get a check. You're going to get some cash in some level. Sometimes it's $200, $500, but like that's rent for a month. That's your book payment. That's whatever it might be. But sometimes it's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, which is a semester, a year at school. So that's a big deal. The school aid also kind of falls within the scholarships. So if your student is applying to a certain major, for example, I always encourage them to check out the financial aid. Everybody should look at the financial aid department, especially once they've been admitted and to kind of know where they're going. Look at the financial aid page. But definitely if you're like looking and you have a pretty good idea what major you're going to be in, go through the financial aid page, but also go through that department's page. Sometimes they'll have departmental scholarships. Some schools, if you came to the, for example, the case study, we will automatically consider students for our school scholarship. Others might say we follow up with them. There's a separate application that they have to fill out for our school scholarships. That's something that they're going to have to investigate a little bit on their own. Sometimes it's part of that application process in their portal that they'll get access to after they've been admitted. Financial aid application. Other times it's kind of like you kind of got to know where to look. It's not always clear school to school. Okay, but I definitely encourage them after they've gotten everything submitted, get on there and start poking around. You know, spending an hour and making $1,000, not too bad. The middle class scholarship is something that you'll see in the UC system. So it's determined on your income, and it's up to $150,000 a year. Okay, and it's all applied after other need or merit-based aid. Okay. It will provide a percentage of your student's tuition, and this is as part of the FAFSA process. They're really trying to make, again, I think easy, but I think it's also cutting out the paperwork on everyone's part. If you submit the FAFSA, you're going to be automatically considered for a lot of these things. But I'm just letting you know there are these things available that you might see. The UC Blue and Gold Scholarship, again, and this is that tuition and fees, and that's it will cover tuition for families with less than $80,000 total family income. And there's, again, no separate application. You just need the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. Okay, and again, all this stuff, if you just looked up Blue and Gold Scholarship, check it out. There's a lot of literature online about the different details and things like that. This is kind of just the, a little bit to get you chomping at the bit to go look it up. But that's out there as well. We kind of covered this already, FAFSA or California DREAM Act. One thing that I'll just mention that I didn't mention earlier regarding the California DREAM Act and the FAFSA, as long as the student, so again, the student is the focus here of these applications, both the college application and the financial aid application. Your parent stuff is kind of just an addendum. They need the information because they don't make money. Okay, but the student is what they're looking for. As long as the student is a citizen, doesn't matter if this parent is or not. Okay, so the parents do not have to provide their citizenship status. It's really about the student. It gets a little bit tricky when your parent doesn't file taxes, but that's another situation. This is what the California Dream Act looks like. When you're logging in, it looks very different. It's a different website than the FAFSA, so that's just something to note. And this is the FAFSA website. Okay, mine looks, every year they do a little bit different. I didn't go through and make a new screenshot. It's pretty much the same last time I checked. So one big thing that I want to point out that I notice many times students doing correctly, okay? Communicate, well, I guess maybe, this is one thing that your students will do that you need to help your student communicate with you. I was gonna say, have your student communicate to your parent that you're all here. Students are not here. Please communicate with your child. Your child is the one that should be starting this application, not you. Because what ended up happening is your kid's gonna go home or may not be here at school with us and like, I'm gonna start my FAFSA, awesome. And they're gonna get on there and start their FAFSA. And then you as the parent is gonna get on at home after this meeting and say, I'm gonna start the FAFSA. And they get on and start the FAFSA. And then you have 2 or 3 different FAFSA, and maybe 2 parents start the FAFSA. Like they get 2 or 3 different FAFSAs going on. You need one FAFSA. Having multiple FAFSAs is bad. You do not want that. Okay, so make a point person. That point person should be your child. They need to be the one that has the login, that does this, and basically brings you in when you're needed. So they will actually click on the start a new FAFSA to start that. Anytime that they come back after they've created an account, they will need to use this login button. Okay, these little blue icons, once you, for example, submitted your FAFSA, you can go in and make corrections. You can only add up to 10 schools at a time. So when you're filling out the FAFSA, if you have more than 10 schools you're applying to, you need to submit all the way through with the 10 schools. You'll go back in after you've submitted and go click on add schools, and you'll be able to add 10 more. And then if you're adding more, you can add more. And then also at the very end, if you need to access your student aid report, for example, some scholarship applications might ask for your FAFSA, SAR, or student aid report, and you can print that there. Okay. It also typically gets emailed to you. This page talks about deadlines, okay? And it's one thing to note is if you are applying out of state, okay, I would go through and check out for what school you're applying to and then click on the different states that you're thinking about applying to. Every state is gonna have a different deadline in terms of that priority financial aid. Okay, so please read through that. All applications must be submitted no later than June 30th, okay? And every state's gonna fluctuate a little bit. They might have a priority deadline that you might wanna meet in that state. You will need your social, so each of you will need your socials, okay, because that's what you're going to use to sign up for that FSA ID. You'll need prior years completed, filed, federal income tax returns and any supplemental W-2s that you might have left off or got recently, that kind of stuff, and any other records that you might have that regards your finances, because I'll be asking for some of that stuff. Information on your bank accounts and investment records, untaxed income if possible. That FSA ID that I talked about, the Federal Student Aid ID, and then that if you need it in Spanish for some reason, you can also change both the digital copy and then if you wanted the printed copy, some people just like to write things down and print them. You cannot actually submit it paper anymore. You have to submit, you can submit signatures, but you can't submit the whole thing. You have to do it electronically. But you can, if you're in the pencil and paper type, you can order them. At this point, again, a little late probably for that, so you might just want to do it online. FSA ID, it used to be a PIN. You used to sign in with like a 4 or 5 digit code. Essentially, it's your digital signature that at the end of the process, it'll ask you to sign in. Your student will sign it, and a parent will sign it. And that's it. It'll walk you through who needs to sign at the very end of that process. This is the page where what it looks like when you create that FSA ID. And there's a few other pages after this, but this is kind of the first page that you'll see. If you get stuck, you might. It's a federal form. It's not always easy to understand. They have in the recent years done a really, really good job of making the process more digestible cutting out the pieces of the process that are not required, and also providing a very, very clear help area. Okay, so if you guys get stuck and like, oh shoot, I don't know what to do next, there's a help section that you're probably not the first person to get stuck there. Okay, a lot of people probably have gotten stuck there. Okay, and there's usually kind of they actually have like, okay, we're in the process, like there's a lot of people having problems right now this time of the year. So like this is something that we see a lot of. Most popular ones at the top. You can also go through here. You can also search like, I don't know what to do with line 40 or something like that. You can plug that in. It might have something there. The other nice thing is, and I think I have it on the next screen, they have a great help service, especially between the filing months that are typically the main filing months. So like now through March. I found personally, I don't like sitting on the phone. I'd rather sit on my computer and do other things and wait for the chat person to respond. I found them to be very responsive, guys, and super helpful. Like, if there's something I don't know, that's where I go. I go and ask them. You have that at your fingertips too. So I'd encourage you guys, if you or your student gets stuck, utilize the phone, utilize the chat service. The email service, I will warn you, probably takes much longer. Chat service typically is much faster response, I found. And then they can actually help you right then and there. And they are experts on the FAFSA. It's their system. They know what needs to go where. For example, I have a student that emailed me earlier that said, I have a question about a couple different tax forms my parents have. Again, not a tax person. I can do my own taxes, but that's about it. I'm going to have to, I found a few things online that's pretty unclear. I'm going to probably call them in and sit down. We're going to chat with them together and we're going to figure it out because it's pretty complex. And you guys can do that too. It's pretty super helpful. Sometimes there's some question in terms of student dependency. Most students, if they live with you, they're your dependent. Another thing about the FAFSA is, for example, if you have a separated household or a divorced household, separated gets a little tricky. Formally divorced, it's not as tricky. It's going to be based on, it's not, they don't take both incomes into play. It is based on whoever the student resides with the most. Okay, and so that is the finances you'll need to use. CSS profile, on the other hand, typically most schools will take a non-custodial parent's income into account as well. So that's just something most students typically are dependents. It's very rare that we see dependent or independent high school students. So we're going to skip through some of this stuff. The data retrieval tool is back. It was kind of questionable. They had some they brought it down for a while last year because there was like insecure transfer of data or I don't know, something about the internet that they didn't like. They were transferring sensitive information in a way that wasn't up to code or something. And so they took it offline. So the nice thing about this, and I would encourage you to do this, it also helps. So there's a process at the end called verification. Okay. What verification is basically if you type stuff in, you probably will get verified, which means they're going to ask for additional documentation. About 1/3 of people get verified every year. So you're almost guaranteed to be verified sometime over the course of your student's college experience. Think of it like auditing, getting audited by the IRS, but not quite as intense. Okay, so they will ask you to prove, like send in statements, send in your tax information, like send in some supporting documentation, because all this is pretty much self-reported if you're typing things in. If you use this IRS data retrieval tool, basically it will connect, you'll log into the IRS and it'll pull all of your tax information directly from them. It also makes the process really easy. It's hard to mess it up. And it pretty much almost always bypasses you from verification. Okay, so I would encourage you, do the IRS data retrieval tool. It makes it so much easier, in my opinion. Okay, you just have to, you'll log in, you'll transfer the data from the IRS into the FAFSA, and then just continue on with the process. I always get questions from typically parents as well about what if we have some sort of special circumstance, like my spouse lost their job, I lost my job, my spouse passed away, my income got cut in half for some reason. We're on a seasonal type of job where we had a really low season. Those things are not really taken into account. So this is 2016 information. So if you had A poor year in terms of making money, that's usually a good year in terms of financial aid. Great year in terms of making money, it's usually a bad year in terms of financial aid because you're going to have to pay more. And that could be different than what this year is. Okay, so the money in the bank might not always match up with what they think you have. Okay, so, and I would say it's pretty large circumstances. It's not like I got a new car and our car payment's higher now. They're not going to really pay attention to that, but like those big circumstances, I lost my job, things like that, those are special circumstances. What you're going to do is you're going to need to, after you get your financial aid packages back, you will contact the financial aid offices, and they have what's called professional judgment. What that is you're going to kind of, they might have a process, so again, check the website, but typically if you call and ask to speak to a financial aid officer, they'll be able to help you with that. And you just need to, they'll typically ask you to explain what the circumstances are, okay? This is not some place to really be withholding in terms of, I mean, you can withhold details, but like if it affects your finances, they probably need to know about it because it will help them make a better decision. They can actually adjust what you qualify for based on those circumstances. So like if your EFC was $20,000 and you know, if they can like potentially recalculate it based on your current income and make it $5,000, they might be able to do that. They might not make it zero. They might not make it all the way to what they think they should, but it likely has the ability to potentially lessen your responsibility in terms of finances. Sometimes people will tell you that financial aid offers are negotiable. I would not use that word. You're not bartering for a car, but it does not mean that it's not that set in stone as well. Okay, so do not call the schools asking them to kind of like, hey, I'm on the phone with Harvard now too. You guys better like, you know, figure out who's going to offer me more money and then you'll get my signature. It's not like you're like signing for an NFL team or something. They're gonna, but if you feel like there's something, you know, there's a smidgen of money, say like, you know, we are like $3,000 short. Like we have a $3,000 gap. This is our first choice school. If we can make this $3,000 gap work, we'd probably go here. If not, we're going to go somewhere else. Pick up the phone and call. It does not hurt to ask. You've already been admitted. They're not going to turn around and tell you no because you called and asked about money. They might say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. But they also might say, you know what? Let's look around. I think we potentially could qualify for this scholarship. Like, we just need you to submit this application. If you can do that, we might be able to get you some more money. Okay, so pick up the phone and call. Again, probably not going to solve a $45,000 difference. More like a couple $1,000s, usually what you see kind of ending up working. But it doesn't hurt to ask anything. Okay, you just have to sit on the phone for 6 hours on hold. You will get that confirmation page at the end of the process. This is kind of what it looks like in a very, very small print. In this general area, you'll see the EFC. This person's was $4,443. Kind of gives you a rough estimate of the Pell Grant and then the Stafford loan estimates. It also, typically on these reports, it also gives you graduation rates on each of the schools that you've added. And a few other details. They kind of just, I think someone probably sued the government and said, you didn't tell us that we weren't going to graduate in 5 years and blah, blah, blah. But that's where, that is, if you have multiple children in college at the same time, you do have to do a FAFSA for each student. But once you complete the FAFSA for one student for that year, you can easily, there's an option to make that data go into another student's FAFSA too. So if that's you now, if that's you coming up, just know that case. We will skip this. Okay, so here's where I kind of want to change it up a little bit. We're going to go off the presentation. I'm actually trying to write on the screen again. This is where you guys will need this. Did you guys get a copy of this? Okay, cool. We won't be going through all this, so don't pay attention to like the 8 pages. We're going to pick and choose a few of these things together. All right, so I'm going to try this, and hopefully this will work. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to screen share now for a second so you won't have to look at my face. And so let's see if I can do this and then do. So this is a packet of sample award letters. So that award letter is something that you will get at the end of the process. Cross my finger this works. not no big deal. We'll just do it without it, and I'll use the whiteboard. But I was going to try to let these people see online. So when we're looking at, we will actually use, let's see, which one do I want to use? At least didn't print very well. Kind of ugly to look at. Hey, so let's just, for fun's sake, let's just use the front one since it's on top. So I'm going to write up here. And so, for example, if we look at this first one, they're going to get some general information about welcome to our school, congratulations, all that good stuff. And then they get right down to it. They're going to give you an award, and it's just going to be a list just like this. You'll typically see the award broken down by semester or term. Okay, so if they have 3 terms, they'll many times break it down by term. So if your student only attends, for example, 1 term, say they take a term off or they don't enroll for the 2nd term, they're not going to get the full amount. They're going to get the amount for the term that they're actually at school. And then the total overall. So one thing that this award letter does not have, which I'll show you, I think there's another one that does. There we go. If you turn kind of to the back of the 2nd page, just to show a comparison, which we might use next. But I'll use it. Let's actually start with this one because this one actually makes more sense to start with, and I'll show you the front one in a second. The back of this 3rd page, it has a couple blue bars. Or maybe the back of the 2nd page, sorry. So one, front page, and then the back.
Or example detail?
Yes, at the top. I didn't even see the title. So it tells you the total cost of attendance. All right, so for this school, that's going to be $58,000. Okay. What this is going to tell you, if I can read through this like 3D looking printing, is you are going to be getting a total of, that's the COA. Your, where's your need on here? Let's see. It's going to tell us that. I don't know if this one does or not. This one does not show our total financial needs. Some schools will show that. It'll kind of give you that calculation that we showed. Some level of financial need. We'll just say it is $10,000 as your EFC. Because I like that number. It's a round number that's easy to calculate. Okay, so what that means is we're going to have $48,000 of need. All right, so that's the number that they come up with based on your EFC and that cost of attendance that's up there. So there's what they're saying underneath this financial aid to be paid to student account. It's going to say we are going to be given about $3,400 in a direct loan, and that's subsidized. We're going to be given $5,500, so the maximum amount of that Pell Grant. And then at the end, we see the big whopping $32,000 in a school grant. And that grant is the magic word. Okay. So that's a pretty good financial aid offer. This is most likely a private school. Okay. And what that's going to tell us is if we add all this up after this line here, we're going to get, see if my math skills are on point or not. Oh wait, let's see. I'm looking at the wrong column here. So it's harder to write on than you would think. So does it look about right? Close enough. That gives us about $42,700 in aid. Okay, so if we take that number, so $42,000 in aid, what we're going to do is we're going to take our need, 48,000, minus our aid, 42,000. We'll just round it up. Okay, and so that gives us 6,000, and that is a gap. So their award that they gave us, minus that $10,000 from the cost of attendance, okay, we are still $6,000 short. Okay, so that would mean we typically would be expected about $16,000 in dollars that we would need to come up somehow. Okay, and that could be college savings. That could be something you've set aside. Could be grandma. Could be work, money that your student has put aside for working. Okay, the big thing is we want to make sure that we are also multiplying this by 4. If we're, knowing the graduation rates of your schools is also important, because that might become 5 or 6, depending on the school. The other thing to note about financial aid is, again, it's a yearly process. That $32,000 grant, that's a question to really ask potentially the financial aid office is, if my student maintains adequate progress, is that grant level guaranteed, or will it fluctuate by either going up or going down? That would be really good information to know ahead of time before you make a decision. I do not want to throw schools under the bus. Like, I don't think that they're going to intentionally entice students in by giving them a giant grant their first year and then cut it in half or a quarter the next year. But it might be adjusted, okay, based on their endowment, based on their funding priorities. Okay, and so that's a great question really to ask before you guys sign up is, how is this financial aid package potentially going to change in the future? Is this a freshman only grant? Is this something that's renewable for how many years? Things like that will help make you make a good decision about your financial aid and the schools that you decide to end up enrolling in.
How did you get from 6,000 to 16,000? Is that like room and board and stuff?
So up here we have this EFC. So that's pretty much the money you have to pay automatically. So I add that to the gap, because you're going to pay that EFC pretty much no matter what, unless you earn that's where scholarships and stuff like that potentially can reduce that EFC amount if they can get that full. So this number here is also I'm sorry, not that number. Don't pay this number. This is also called full demonstrated need. Okay, so that's how you demonstrate need. That is so there are some schools out there, again, typically ones that will require the CSS profile that take a much deeper look at your finances. For example, Stanford is one. Very difficult to get into, but they are a school that does what's called meeting full demonstrated need. So basically, after what they say your family can afford based on your finances, which again could be 0, could be a much larger figure. After that, if you have a need like this, that $48,000, they're going to pay for that no matter what. No loans typically. They're just going to write it off. So you're going to pay $10,000 a year to go to Stanford potentially. Okay. Problem is you got to get into Stanford, which is a hurdle in itself. And again, with the CSS profile, it's not always as cut and dry as kind of that EFC number. Yes.
And that's them offering you a loan also, though.
Typically, no. Most schools, there might be some. Many schools that guarantee to meet full demonstrated need are actually moving towards it's gonna be loan free. There are schools out there that will package loans in that as well, but it's typically rather minimal compared to some other thing. This is actually a pretty small loan package too. This is not too bad, but when you look at it, this is probably a good example of a private school. Okay, when you look at this, that's not that big of a number for a private school in itself. Oh wow. It's probably more on par with like a CSU and UC, what you might end up walking out the door with based on this school grant. Okay, that's the big ticket item there. Okay, that's that tuition deduction basically. If we just quickly looked at another example, let's see. Let me find another good one. maybe these back ones that are a little harder. Let's go to the last page, the black and white one that's not hard to read. So this one is also another good one that, again, says congratulations. It also breaks down the cost of attendance. So that average cost of attendance is about $20,000. It then breaks down again by term. This is a good example of school on a trimester system. Their total amounts based on the grants, the subsidized loans, the direct unsubsidized loans, and then a cash payment that your student might make, which they have the option to do. So like I do encourage students, and this was told to me that I totally ignored and I wish I didn't, is for those unsubsidized loans, pay off the interest as you go through school. Just do that. I mean, it's not a lot of money. If you just pay off the interest, then you leave school again, just like you have unsubsidized loans. It'll still be money, but then you'll have an income. But typically a loan payment of $100 or whatever it is a month, again, reminds them I'm here for a reason. It also is typically an amount that's not unreasonable if they have like a part-time job or something like, or summer job or something like that. And it helps them keep their head in the game of this actually is costing me money. It's not just free time, because it feels like free time. I guarantee it. It will feel not like they're, just having fun. They'll have work to do, but it's like money won't exist for them for the most part when they're in college. They're buying food with their meal plan. They're, your guys are buying their gas home or their plane ticket home or whatever it is. Sometimes it feels like a free ticket in terms of the money sense. So that kind of helps keep them in check. So that breaks down so that you can see their grand total is about $13,000, including the grants that they offer. So again, what is that showing you? That's about a $7,000 difference. Okay, we don't know what the this one also does not show what the EFC is that I can see. So that might be $7,000. They might have that $7,000 EFC and they did meet that full financial need. It might be $3,000, and then again you'd have that $4,000 gap to worry about. So again, that's going to be where that piece comes in. On the back page, it also breaks down so again, some of the annual limits regarding what that looks like. And then I don't think, the only other one I'll have you briefly look at, we're not going to break it down, is this online experience example a few pages back. This just gives you a rough idea of what it might look like. So sometimes they don't actually get a letter. Sometimes it goes through, and I would say increasingly it goes through a different option to do, like through their portal. When they get their students' portal through their college that they're going to, that's where like they'll check their status. They will check their how their application is going, where they'll register for classes, but typically also where they'll find their financial aid award in that portal, plus also where they will accept different areas of the award. The other piece that's interesting that not everybody knows is, and I don't think I projected that after all. The only other piece that I think some people don't really know is, let's see, you don't have to accept every single award. Always accept the free money. It's my tip. But if your family, for example, only needs, they offer you $10,000 in loans and you really only need $2,000, you don't have to take it's not a take it or leave it option. You will accept the amount that you need to make it work. Okay. And so typically on a letter like that, you might have to call or that kind of thing. But typically, like I said, through that portal, it'll literally say, I want to accept or deny, or I want to accept an amount. And you just write in the amount. Okay. If you're only accepting an amount, I would spend significant time, unless you're like the day before it's due, really researching the amount that you actually need. Okay. Too often I have students or parents be like, oh yeah, we can make it work like that. And we accept $2,000 of $10,000. And then 2 months later, something happens. You're like, oh man, I didn't realize how much housing was going to cost me living in Santa Barbara or San Francisco. And we really need more money. Many times they may not be able to reaccess that money that was given to them. Okay. So it's not something like, take your time with making that decision. It's not something you have to rush into. You also want to shop around and compare. Okay. I don't know if I can pull it up. I'm going to try to. I'm going to try to pull it up, and I'm going to take you off my face again screen. But let me see if I can get this for you to show you. I have a college cost tool that students have access to. And let's see where this is. Let's see. There we go. So this is a tool that students can access via the school website. I've shown some of you guys during your post-secondary planning meetings, but what this does is basically allows you, this is an end game look, okay? So you'll be able to list every school that you've been admitted to or you're considering in that final kind of breakdown. Plus, for example, here's the average cost of attendance in the red, okay? It will also add up, you just basically enter these ones, don't enter anything else. You just add in what things you've been offered. It will say, here's my tuition, here's my room and board, okay, here's my books, supplies, transportation, personal expenses. Okay, those top two are typically called direct costs, meaning you're gonna pay that directly to the school. Indirect costs are typically not paid to the college itself. That's gonna be gas, insurance, book fees, dinner, things like that, unless you're on the meal plan. It's gonna add up all those lines per year, and it'll show you average for 4 years. Okay, so you can get an idea of, and this is really informative to students. Oh man, I didn't realize it wasn't gonna cost me $100,000 to go to school. Okay, it kind of like is, they don't really think about it like that. Okay, and then on the other end, it's gonna ask you the financial aid that you've been awarded, both in grants and scholarships, the work study, any loans and such, plus the financial aid package per year. So after that, it's gonna give you exactly how much the gap is. And it's pretty amazing to see them all lined up together. Okay, instead of having to look in different places, you just line them up all in one spot. And you can easily say it will actually color code it for you. It'll say you have more need, you have less need, you're right on the money. Okay, and you can kind of shop around that way too because it's a two-part college admissions process. It's getting into the school first and then getting money to pay for that school second. And just because you got in does not always mean that is the right school for you. Okay, and that's sometimes really, really hard for kids to hear. Okay. However, that's again where that voice of maturity and reason that you might have as a parent does need to come into play to a certain level. Telling you to ruin your entire relationship with your child because you're going to tell them, no, you cannot go to this school, and that is exactly what they want, and that's the only option for them. They just need to be informed, like, if you're going to go to the school, this is how much you're going to get from us. The rest of it, you're going to have to find for yourself, which might mean going to Wells Fargo, Chase, places like that, if they have that $10,000 gap. That's not money that they're going to get from the school, so they have to go somewhere else to find it. Okay, and so I would just have those real conversations earlier rather than later. Okay, but this is a helpful tool to kind of really comparatively shop together. It's kind of like, when you see consumer reports, they have them all lined up, and just this is how it all ranks. This is the exact same concept. So I'd encourage you guys to use that together with your students. Your students will be the ones that will be able to download this, but they can download it and share it with you, okay, if you want to have your own. I do sell this online, and so it helps fund my conferences and my other learning activities. So I don't publish it for everyone on the website, but you guys, my students, can access it for free. And so ultimately, that is a great tool, in my opinion, to be able to check out kind of how much this is actually going to cost us across the board. Most schools will expect you to have a decision by May 1st, plus a deposit, unless you're doing some type of early decision requirement, where basically, if you're doing that, you probably should have a pretty good idea of the finances way like now when they're applying, rather than waiting until May. Because if you're doing early decision, if they admit you, that pretty much means you're placing a deposit the next day, and that you're going to be enrolling there. And unless there is a wildly different financial aid, like between your need and what they're asking you to pay, that gap is ginormous. Will they really make huge changes and let you out of that? It'd have to be pretty big. It wouldn't be like, we're $10,000 short. They're like, tough. We're $50,000 short. They probably will let you out. Okay. But it's less of it's definitely not a guarantee. I think Mary at our case study was a little generous in how easy it is to get out for many schools. Some schools might be easier than others, but I would just caution about that piece. May 1st, again, they're expecting a deadline. One thing that I would be remiss to skip over is please, please, please do not double deposit. Okay. I always risk putting this idea in people's heads by bringing it up because it's not always a well-known thing. But basically what it is when people cannot make a decision or refuse to make a decision by that May 1st deadline, they think, well, we'll just, what's, what, 750 deposit, what's $1,400, and we'll have a couple options available to us. Okay. One that is highly unethical, it's actually against kind of that code of conduct at the colleges. Will they find out? Probably not. Will they kick you out if they do? Most likely not. Okay. But it is unethical. The other thing that it really does that really most is when you double deposit, that school is expecting you to come. So they're building their freshman class based on that deposit. Okay. If your student is on a wait list and someone has double deposited, what ends up happening is your student stays on that wait list probably until like the very last day when that student doesn't end up showing up. And then most likely your student has already made a decision to go elsewhere when really that school might have been the spot for them. And they could have got off that wait list had they not been expecting that double deposited student. Okay. So as a professional, I would encourage you, please do not double deposit. College professionals will tell you the same thing. It highly frustrates them because it does not allow them to serve the students that they want to serve the most as best they can. Okay, so please don't do that. Do your best to make that decision. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, you and your kid are going to probably have to make a gut decision. You are not going to know which school is going to be the best for your kid, most likely. Okay, I will just guarantee you that. I always have kids in my office in the springtime, parents in my office in the springtime. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Just tell me what to do. And I'm just like, do your research. At some point, you're just going to have to take that research, make an educated decision, and kind of go with it. And you'll have to figure out the rest on the way. Okay, so I don't say that lightly. Again, always do that research, but at some point, there is such thing as researching it to death. Okay, and stressing out over that decision is not always worth the stress that it brings. And sometimes the student just needs to make a call like, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I think is right, and going with that feeling, and most likely, they're usually right. Okay, that is kind of the pieces that I really wanted to go through tonight with you. Does anybody have any questions that you want me to address right now? I know that it's, again, very general, not very specific to individual families, but it kind of takes us through that spectrum, the timeline of that financial aid process, and things that you could be looking forward to, well, maybe not looking forward to, but expecting to see in the near future, and it will be here before we know it. So if you guys have questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. Otherwise, if you have more individual questions, I'm happy to set up appointments over the next couple of weeks and kind of go over those as well. You do not need to go home and file the FAFSA tonight. Okay, next week is fine. Just try, earlier is better than later, but like it doesn't have to be immediate. Okay, yeah.
So by filing the FAFSA every year, you're receiving a new financial aid letter from your college every year. Once they're into a college, then they might adjust it. So
in that example, when we had, for example, the 2 kids now in college versus 1, that financial aid offer is going to be significantly different for both kids probably now that they have 2 kids versus 1, because that EFC number is going to be very different. Okay, because now you're not only supporting 1 student tuition, you're now supporting 2. Okay, how wildly it is again depends on finances, depends on the school, but yes, the loan amounts, things like that will probably it'll probably fluctuate every year no matter what, at some level. But definitely if you have like major changes in finances, major changes in like family situations, students in college, that's when you'll see the largest changes in your financial aid award limit. But yes, you'll get those every year. You'll file those every year. You'll accept the award amounts every year, and so on. Good question. Any other questions? All right. May the financial aid be with you. And may you get a lot.